Hey crew, before we get started today, I just wanted to say welcome to Season 4 of Enterprising Individuals. I'm so excited to be back. It felt really weird not producing new episodes every week, but we're back now, and I'm chomping at the bit to kick off our 4th year of the show, so welcome. We'll get started in just a minute. I wanted to make a few public service announcements first. If you like the show and you like the thoughtful, in-depth discussions about Star Trek that we have, you should join us on Facebook. We have a discussion group called Enterprising Interlocutions, where we talk about the ins and outs of your favorite episodes of Trek, just like on this show. So come check us out by searching for Enterprising Interlocutions on the book. And we also have even more offerings for our patrons this year. We've got our usual recaps, our episode commentaries, and our show merch. And we're adding outtakes from guest interviews. Sometimes the conversation turns to interests outside of Star Trek, and that stuff usually ends up on the cutting room floor. For instance, my guest today, Lee Sargent, and I talked about non-Trek subjects. I think more than we actually talked about Star Trek. But you can hear the deleted scenes, if you will, from each episode if you're a patron. Go to patreon.com/EISTPOD. And for just $1 a month, you get access to all of that and sneak peeks at what's coming up on the show this year. I hope you're watching Discovery, and if you are, you might be interested in our side project, Discoverage, where I and my co-host Ella Pearson do a live recap show every Thursday night after Star Trek Discovery is released on CBS All Access. Season 2 of Discovery has been great so far. The show has been fun to do so far. We've got some great guests lined up for future episodes, so join us Thursdays for Discoverage. You can go to enterprisingindividuals.com for more details. Okay, let's get cracking. I had a lot of fun talking with my guest, Lee Sargent, for today's episode. Lee lives in Australia, and they were experiencing a heat wave in the Antipodes at the same time that we were suffering through the polar vortex here in the anti-Antipodes. And so we did our best to work it out. We got a little silly, but we had a good time. And I know how the international dateline works now, so that's good. So enjoy the episode. With that, let's get underway.
It's worked so far, but we're not out yet.
I want to know what you're thinking. There are some things you can't hide. I want to know what you're feeling. Tell me what's on your mind.
Pure energy.
Hailing frequencies open, and welcome to Enterprising Individuals, the Star Trek discussion podcast that boldly goes into excruciating detail about the series, characters, and stories of the Star Trek universe. I'm your host, Aaron Coker, a.k.a. Caliban, and pergium miners, take heart. After loading 16 tons, you may be a day older, but debt no longer exists in the 23rd century. Now, about your paychecks. I'm joined on this episode by Lee Sargent. Lee is an illustrator, blogger, and podcaster, and he's the artist behind the Star Trek 365 project. Lee, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me on.
It's great to have you here. Permission to come aboard granted. Today we'll be talking about The Devil in the Dark, the 26th episode of the first season of Star Trek, the original series. Seeking out new life and new civilizations is the 5-year mission of the USS Enterprise, and on her journeys she's discovered a multitude of alien life forms, some welcoming and some threatening. The vast majority of those aliens tend to be humanoids with a primary skin color or Play-Doh foreheads, but some are so strange and so truly alien that they challenge our idea of what life is. And the real mission of Starfleet begins when we learn to put aside our prejudices and preconceptions to truly embrace the discoveries that we seek. But we'll talk about that a little later in the show. First, Lee, let's talk about your backstory. Every time I have a new guest on, I want to know how they first became a Star Trek fan.
Yeah, no problem. I actually came to Star Trek pretty early on. As a kid, we used to have it here in Australia I think it was on Saturdays or Sunday afternoons. And it always felt like it was the first season was repeated over and over again. I don't know if they showed the second 2 seasons as much, but I remember seeing the Corbomite maneuver a lot.
Okay, sure.
And and maybe that's because as a kid I really probably just saw Baylock and really that kind of solidified itself into my memory. But that was my earliest, because I remember they used to have shows like Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea and stuff like that. So it was really a golden era of these kind of innovative sci-fi shows that may have, if you kind of describe them out loud, might appear a little bit silly now, like Land of the Giants and stuff like that. Yes. But it was just a perfect time for me as a child to discover sci-fi on television. Of course, Star Trek was the number one for me, and it's really odd because none of my family were massively into Star Trek at all. This is something I came to on my own, which is kind of nice.
Star Trek belongs to the world, but it is originally an American property. Are there any Australian sci-fi shows that maybe American or worldwide audiences wouldn't really know?
Wouldn't really know. Well, Farscape was made here,
of course. Yes.
So we had a lot of Australian accents on that show, which is nice to see.
Yeah, a lot of aliens were from Australia in that. Yeah.
Yeah, there were a lot of. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Space Perth.
That's it. It was weird too because it wasn't that big here when it was first on. I remember they had Channel 9, I think, was the channel here in Australia that co-financed it.
Did you have the Sci-Fi channel there, like the cable channel?
No, not really. We do now,
sure.
And we probably did a while after that. But it took a fair while for what we call pay TV to come out here in Australia.
Yeah.
Because we always just had our free-to-air. And I'm pretty certain our TV is quite different to the way American TV is set up, because I'm not 100% sure I understand how, like, cable versus networks versus whatever over there. But we just had say 4 free-to-air television stations, which would show a mixture of American, British, and Australian content.
I see. Okay.
Which is probably they're probably the 3 biggest that we would get. Because like Doctor Who, I grew up with Doctor Who, which is a British thing, and I know that's big in America now, but I think when I was a kid, it wasn't a big thing in America. But Farscape's probably the one that I latch onto.
Yeah.
Because it was such a great production, and it just didn't get as much love here as it should have done.
I love Farscape, and I mention it probably way too much on a Star Trek show, but maybe someday I'll do a Farscape podcast. You're the creator of the Star Trek 365 project, which I'm sure my listeners are familiar with, but just in case they aren't, can you tell us all about it?
So last year, I embarked on a somewhat silly idea, was to draw and post a Star Trek scribble every day. And I say scribble because they vary from what they are, type of thing. The absolute kind of the simplest I've ever done was a Spock on a napkin at the very last minute a couple of years ago, which was it was at a Christmas party or something, and I just realized I hadn't posted something. So what it was, it's a daily illustration featuring Star Trek. And I managed to get through last year, and it was an amazing kind of experience, because it's one of those kind of things where you're challenging yourself and you become extraordinarily exhausted, and the world keeps going on and you need to balance that. But it was really wonderful for my own personal journey drawing. When we were coming towards the end of the year, I had a lot of people because we grew a wonderful community around it. A lot of kind of really supportive, just fun Star Trek fans who just celebrated kind of all these little moments in Star Trek. And I had a lot of them kind of saying, well, what am I going to do next year now when these don't come into my inbox every morning? And I was like, well, I tell you what, it was something I was toying with for ages, is to keep the Star Trek 365 going. Not me drawing it, because I think my arm would have fallen off.
Right.
But then I threw it over to everyone else, because a couple of times throughout the year, particularly when I was really tired, people would be like, why didn't you put this character in? It's like, it's my drawing, you do it type of thing.
I'm a mortal man, that's flesh and blood.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I cannot put everyone's favorite character into these drawings every day. So what I did was I threw it out to everyone and said, look, it's your turn. I don't care what level you're at. I don't care what medium you use. I don't care as long as it's creative, as long as it's something of your own. I'd love to see everyone's Star Trek fan art, and I will feature a different one every day for 2019. And that's what we've been doing, and it's been absolutely amazing. the response was immediate, which was awesome. I got like a full month's worth of illustrations or photos sent through pretty much straight away. So it wasn't a matter of having to chase anyone down.
Yeah.
But I've seen knitting. I've seen bridge schematics. I've seen mock-up novels. It's just I'm constantly impressed by the creativity and the different directions that this all takes, and I just I'm really enjoying it. I'm really having as much fun as hopefully everyone else is.
Yeah, it's such an amazing collaboration, and people's contributions there's just so many talented people out there, and it's great that something like Trek can, and then you yourself, of course, can get people together to do this. Clearly, you can't pick favorites, but there are any submissions that really surprised you or really stood out for you?
Weirdly enough, today's when we're recording. It's actually one done by a 12-year-old or 11-year-old,
Okay.
I think 12. And it's just wonderful. It's a Trouble with Tribbles illustration. Apparently, they were just so excited to hear that they could contribute to the project that they ran out and just drew their version of Kirk being swarmed by tribbles. And I think that's just so exciting, because even today I got an email from someone saying how much that they and their kids enjoy the daily drawings and how inspired the kids were to kind of do their own drawings. And I think that's, anyone who's seen my illustrations realize that I'm not doing photo perfect illustrations of people. I do a very zen, childlike approach to drawing, which has taken me, nearly 30 years to develop, which is crazy.
Yeah.
But it's accessible to anyone, and this is something that I can't stress enough about, particularly even the Star Trek 365 project, but any franchise, any genre, anything. If you could draw a stick figure, and everyone can. I hear so many people say I can't draw, and it's like, you can. You just can't draw the way you would like to draw, or the way you picture someone drawing, type of thing.
Sure,
because
sure.
if any artist would tell you that they have people that they admire, and every time they post something beautiful online, it kills them a little bit inside their heart, because they'd like to steal their abilities. And we all bring something different to the table. But I really stress that if you can draw, if you can just get over yourself and draw a stick figure version of it, I think that's awesome, and it's creative and it's wonderful, and it's something that fans can own, and I think that's the important thing. If you want Kirk and Spock and Janeway and Chakotay to team up on an away team mission, you can do that with your own drawings, and no one can stop you. And and it doesn't matter how good it is or how. And I don't like to use the word bad it is, because that's not a thing, but how much how rudimentary it might be. It's your kind of pouring an imagination into a piece of paper, which is relatively cheap and accessible to everyone in the world, which is the other thing I love about drawing. You don't need to invest a huge amount. You need a pencil and a notepad, and you can just go. And I think that's just wonderful, and it just fills my heart with joy when I see people being inspired. And I think I probably, to kind of elaborate even further on your question before, which was my favorite or favorites, or the ones that stand out. I think it's the ones that stand out the most to me are the people who are really trying. And it sounds like I'm kind of saying, they're not good illustrators, or they're not whatever. And that's not the case at all. What I'm saying is they've put themselves out there, and they may not be drawing, again, photo perfect drawings, but they're putting themselves out there and expressing that joy of Star Trek. And I think that's wonderful, and it makes it all worthwhile to me.
That advice about the joy is I think really important, and it's something that I wish that I had heard when I was younger. I have a friend.
Oh yeah.
One of my best friends, who's an illustrator and a comic book artist now, and at the time when we were in junior high or grade school, we would both draw, and I would draw like what I thought was one perfectly sculpted Ninja Turtle head, and be like, hey, check this out. And then over on his side, he's done both sides of the book cover, like this tableau of them fighting against Shredder on a rooftop. And I'm like, screw this, break my pencil, I'm done.
Look, and it'll kill you if you try and compare yourself to anyone. Like I guarantee the best artists out there have someone in the back of their mind that they're jealous of.
Absolutely. So. Well, pretty soon you and other scribblers will have lots of material to work with. I've lost track of how many new Star Trek shows have been announced at this point. Are there any new shows that have been announced in particular that you're looking forward to?
I guess, like everyone else, I'm probably interested in see what they do with the Picard show. Mm-hmm. I've been a little resistant to Discovery, simply in that it wasn't quite hitting the mark for me in the first season. The second season so far, I'm again torn, which is so weird because they've changed a lot of the stuff that I probably would have not have loved in the first season, and now they've kind of done it, and I'm like, now I kind of feel bad for the Discovery crew. yeah, because I will admit that, like, as Saru, when Saru first came, when they first introduced the character, I kind of thought he was a bit ridiculous because is this whole kind of sensing death, and that's what they've been born to do type of thing, and it's like that doesn't seem like a great ability to have because it seemed very arbitrary about whenever his gangly would go up.
Right.
But he completely won me over by the end of the season, and I really, really love the character now. And so now I'm kind of a little bit like, look, I love seeing Captain Pike, but I'd like to see Captain Saru. So I want to see the original Discovery crew kind of shining a lot more instead of being overshadowed possibly by, original series characters. But look, I'll take whatever they got. And with the new shows coming out, it's like I don't think you can kind of they're never going to be able to reproduce exactly what's come before it, and you wouldn't want that. And I think you just need to be open to it and realize that, it's not taking away Next Generation, it's not taking away Deep Space Nine and original series, which of course is my bread and butter. Yeah. It doesn't take away from any of those. This is just where it's at, and it's interesting to see what they're doing.
I think Discovery hasn't screwed it up. I think that they are in pretty good hands, and so I'm definitely looking forward to seeing where they go. Why did you choose this specific episode, Devil in the Dark, to discuss today?
It's my favorite episode, and it wasn't. It's actually it's my favorite episode across the board. I didn't know this until I used to think that. Again, City on the Edge of Forever, which a lot of people will quote as the best episode of Star Trek. Right. I actually, and it's a great episode. It's one of my favorites easily, and probably was my favorite until I realized that Devil in the Dark is actually my favorite episode, and the episode that I think embodies Star Trek in its completeness in one episode. I think everything in Star Trek can be seen in this episode. And I think that it's a wonderful, it's a wonderfully made episode as well. But yeah, it's my favorite. So I thought when we were kind of discussing it, why not talk about the episode I love the most?
I definitely agree that, and as we'll see later, other creators definitely felt the same way about it, encapsulating, everything that there is about Trek. My favorite episode is I like City on the Edge of Forever as well. It's masterfully written, but it's one of those episodes where it takes you away from what the show is really. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So
it's just a good story. It's not a, it's not a great Star Trek episode, but it's a great story.
Yeah. It's the best. Yeah. It's the best Star Trek episode where Spock wears a longshoreman's cap for the entire episode.
That is true.
But what my favorite, I think, probably of original series is Dagger of the Mind.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, which is is an early one in the first season, and it's simply because for me that's kind of what Trek really is. There's no really aliens involved, and Trek doesn't always have a psychological sort of element to it, but just Kirk throwing himself around. There's a beautiful woman who's also really capable. Spock he's on the case in that episode. He's saving everybody's butt. And there's like a bad guy who's in a position of authority that he's abusing. It's like you see that, especially in more modern Trek, you see that kind of story a lot, I think.
Yeah, definitely. It's really, I've never heard anyone say this. You've taken me kind of quite surprised by that, because it's an episode that in fairness to it, I recognise exactly what you're saying. You're 100% correct, but it's an episode I tend to avoid.
Really?
yeah. I just it doesn't float my boat as much. But I do recognise it as a really fantastic episode, as did the South Park people, who I believe parried it completely in one of their episodes at the planetarium instead of the sanitarium or whatever they were calling it. So that really, again, that just impresses me about I love encountering people who have an episode that isn't City on Edge forever.
I did not know about this South Park episode. I gotta watch.
There's a South Park. Yeah, no, there's a South Park episode, because they're massive fans as well, and they parody that whole episode.
And they're like brainwashing people to be more
at the planetarium.
Okay. The planetarium.
They even use the same device. It's the same room. It's first season, I think. First season South Park. Check it out, definitely. Yeah, it's complete, because I'm watching the entire episode going, oh my God, this is Dagger of the Mind. And my wife is going, please stop saying that. You're not making me love you anymore.
Well, we don't want to affect your relationship with this, so we'll move on. We are talking about The Devil in the Dark. It is the 26th episode of the first season of Star Trek, the original series. It first aired on March 9th of 1967 and was written by Gene L. Coon, who we've already established on this program that he is definitely one of the faces on Mount Trekmore. But suffice it to say that he was the line producer for the original series from the departure of John D.F. Black in the first season until the episode A Private Little War, which was midway through the second season. He was also a story editor on the series, and he, of course, contributed many great scripts for the show and is responsible for the introduction of the Klingons, the United Federation of Planets, Starfleet Command, the Prime Directive, and COM to the Star Trek franchise. This episode was directed by Joseph Pevney. It's a name that we've also said many times on this show. He's tied with Mark Daniels for having directed the most episodes of the original series, and he won a Hugo Award for his work on The City on the Edge of Forever, as well as 2 additional nominations for The Trouble with Tribbles and Amok Time. The stardate for this episode is 3196.1, and your assignment, Lee, if you can, is to give us a 25-word synopsis of The Devil in the Dark.
I really wish I'd prepared for that. 25 words. Okay, cool. The Enterprise is sent to investigate a series of murders, I guess, and sabotage at a mining facility, and they discover that things aren't what they seem. How's that?
I think that's pretty good. Or if you put that in, if you put that in Horta speak, it'd be "ugly humans no take eye eggs" or something like that.
It.
Here's some interesting facts from the memory banks about this episode. This episode and all episodes from the original series owe a debt of gratitude to Kellam de Forest. De Forest had a one-man research company called the Kellam de Forest Research Company. He was hired by Roddenberry to verify facts and correct errors in scripts, and that extended to the scientific facts as well. Kuhn had originally used a different chemical other than silicon as the chemical that the Horta were based on, and De Forest suggested that he use silicon instead. His original script also called the planet Thetis 6, but De Forest had discovered that there was an asteroid named Thetis in our solar system already, and he suggested the name Janus 6 instead. He never received any screen credit for his work, as far as I know.
I had never heard of him.
Yes,
so that's actually all news to me.
I learned about him through Inside Star Trek, the memoir by Herb Solow and Bob Justman. Yeah, he did work for other TV shows as well. He worked on The Untouchables for Desilu, and he actually wrote. I've never heard of this show, but he wrote an episode of The Adventures of Jim Bowie, and he wrote 2 episodes of Yancey Derringer. His favorite, in Inside Star Trek, Herb Solow, whenever he talks about him, points out that he would mark up the scripts, like an editor, and his signature remark when something doesn't work is, "This begs explanation." So whenever they saw that, they knew they had to go back and, okay, we got to fix whatever this is.
That's awesome.
William Shatner's father, Joseph, died, sadly, during the filming of this episode. Yep. And incredibly, Shatner chose to finish the day of filming. And Shatner said later that he got a lot of support from Leonard Nimoy in that episode, and also from cinematographer Jerry Finnerman, whose his own father had died while they were making a show a few years back. And Shatner said that he actually found himself laughing at some of Nimoy's acting when Spock is mind melding with the Horta, and that kind of helped him get through the day. Very little time was lost on the production due to the good planning by the crew. In fact, the scene where Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are discussing the spheres was moved from the Enterprise briefing room to Vandenberg's office so they wouldn't have to change sets at all. And I think that change actually improves the episode because you really feel like they are trapped with the quote-unquote monster. You know, they can't just beam away to the ship. It's more claustrophobic that way. Yeah. Shatner flew home to be with his family the day after, so the show did go dark for one day, and then they finished the rest of the episode by shooting around him. Janos Prohaska plays the Horta in this episode. Prohaska was a stuntman and a performer who also played creatures in many shows like The Munsters, Lost in Space, and Bewitched, and so on and so forth. He was also in the movie Escape from the Planet of the Apes from 1971. Apparently his most famous role, and he actually spoke in this role, was the Cookie Bear on the Andy Williams Show. He can be seen in other TOS episodes like The Cage. In The Cage, it was actually cut out of most of The Cage, but there's this giant bird-like creature, looks like the San Diego chicken, that he plays. Right. And also he played the Mugato, of course, in A Private Little War. And it's interesting because he had a spec deal with the producers that if he could come up with a creature design that was cool, they would try to build a story around it. And so apparently he came to Herb Solo, and this is all from David Gerald's book, The World of Star Trek. And he showed them this. I got this great idea. Check this out. And he showed them a prototype of the Horta costume. And he kind of skidded around on the floor. And then he dropped out an egg and everything. And they thought, okay, this is we might be able to put this in something. And so Gene Coon put that in his script. And it's funny because he was an economical man as well, I guess, because on the very last episode of The Outer Limits, which he was working on as well, there's an episode called The Probe, I believe, and there's a giant microbe creature that Prohaska played, and it looks almost exactly like the Horta. So reusing your designs as an artist, I'm sure that you've experienced things like that.
It just makes sense now that you kind of say it. I haven't seen that episode, I don't think. I'll have to check it out just to see the Horta in the background or whatever it is, because it does kind of look like a giant amoeba type of thing.
And apparently he reused the Mugatu costume for an episode of Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea as well, by taking the spikes off of it. So just general underwater gorilla, I guess, in that case. He also played the Yarnik in The Savage Curtain, although no word on who designed that. So I'm just going to assume it was special effects guy Jim Rugg for that.
Yeah.
This is the first episode of Star Trek to air after the show was renewed for a second year, after the successful letter writing campaign organized by Harlan Ellison. In fact, during the closing credits of the episode, the announcer came on and said that Star Trek would be back in the fall, and please don't write any more letters. They were, of course, getting a lot of letters. People would write letters anyway, of course. This time it would be thank you letters for renewing the show. The Horta eggs, it should come as no surprise, were made from toy bouncing balls. Apparently the prop used to depict the damaged reactor circuit for the colony had been used previously as an Enterprise transporter circuit in the Enemy Within episode. And the jumpsuits on the miners in this episode are a particular favorite of mine. They are so weird. These guys are miners. They're not dirty at all. I can understand on a TV show you don't want to necessarily dirty your costumes. Yep. And these jumpsuits would go on to be all throughout the series. You see them through all three seasons. And I was trying to figure out what they reminded me of. Like, I thought these guys all look like they're in like a kids band or something. Like I thought maybe it's the Wiggles or something. And then of course I looked up the Wiggles, and the Wiggles all have solid shirts and black pants. I think inspired by, I'm not trying to pigeonhole you because you're Australian, but inspired by Star Trek. Like the Wiggles all kind of look like they're maybe like a knockoff, like they're coming from the Orville or something.
I think it's such a classic design it's a very clever design when you've got a bold color and black pants. So it definitely could have been inspired by Star Trek. I'm not an authority on the Wiggles, but Yeah, but now that you kind of mentioned it, it does make sense completely but from a design point of view, I think the argument could be made that it's a good design, because it would look easy to differentiate them on a stage. For kids, and kids would be able to identify them really well. So yeah, I mean, and I think that's the thing about the original series in general, and Next Generation to some degree, and of course all the shows, is that their design work is very, very clever in that they do stand out. Like the colors stand out, and particularly like you see Scotty and his red, the red tunic for engineering. It's very clear who he is. Even without kind of looking up type of thing, you can see, that's an engineering or a security guy, and there's a medical or a science person, or there's a command person. It's kind of inspired design work from shorthand for viewers.
Yeah, I was speaking with a guest the other day, and we were sort of wondering if that, people. You could be born today, and with streaming, you could discover the original series, and I don't know, it seems kind of unlikely, but it could resonate with you in some way where you go, "Oh, I want some more of this." And for people who were born at the time when they would be watching, say, Enterprise when they were growing up, I wonder if that affected people's acceptance and assimilation of Enterprise. The fact that they made a conscious decision to make it more military, more monochrome, and more sort of basic, rather than these big colors. Like if their young minds didn't see, bright colors, cartoons, this is interesting, and just thought, I'll move on to something else.
Yeah, I think it's a very valid point, actually. I think it's probably a really... I mean, you look at like Marvel kind of films and DC and comic book characters. They're all very bright. They're all very recognizable very quickly. And whereas with Enterprise, it is, and it's not... I will admit, it's not my favorite uniform to draw because of that reason. Okay. It's very easy and very clear to draw Spock or Kirk, for instance, because you can get away with a lot simply in the fact that the color and the design will give it away very quickly. Yeah,
yellow shirt, swoop of hair. You've got Kirk.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The context isn't required as much, or particularly in my style where there's no nose and very simplistic kind of very simplistic features. But I can produce a Kirk for you, and you'll look at it and go, right, that's a Kirk.
Sure.
McCoy's a little bit easier because he has some facial features that you can make him look like McCoy a lot. But it's a matter of. It is shorthand, basically. And I think that's really... Like, even for Next Generation, people often say things like the beige backgrounds are boring, is something I've heard a lot. And I kind of go, you're missing the point of the design. The design's very clever because it's designed to make them all pop.
Right.
And they do. Anything you add to that set pops. So if you add, like, one of the acoudigrams and, you have, like, a black screen... against beige, it suddenly that screen pops out and looks very cool. If you have Picard standing there in his black and red uniform, he stands out from the background. You're never lost on screen.
Yeah.
Whereas Deep Space Nine went completely the opposite for that and tried to make it look very busy in the background and stuff for their purposes of storytelling. So it's all very good design. And I think that's what's wonderful about even this episode, bringing it back to Devil in the Dark. And everyone will have to forgive me because I always just drop the Devil in the Dark. I just say Devil in the Dark.
Right.
Yeah, and you can sympathise with that. But, Kirk and Spock running through those tunnels, those dark, bluish grey tunnels, they stand out so well. And it's just, they look fantastic. And again, we go back to the miners with their oranges and reddish kind of jumpsuits with whatever the little, I noticed in watching it last night, they have some sort of little brooch thing on their necks. Which I couldn't work out what I couldn't get a clear enough detail. I have to look it up later on what it actually is. But so I noticed that. So yeah, I think against that backdrop, it looks amazing.
That might explain why Voyager and Enterprise don't necessarily do it for me. Is because I always felt that their environments were so sort of clinical and sterile for those reasons. And Anyway, yeah, okay. Well, that's why TNG and the Enterprise D looks like the lobby of a Best Western. Now I understand.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Because it's easy to dress, and nothing gets lost.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it has its own drawbacks. Obviously, things can stand out like a sore thumb. But yeah, it's clever designing. The same with the original Star Trek. They all are quite a contrast with their backgrounds.
Yeah.
So whenever they kind of beam down to a planet or they're in front of a matte screen, all that type of stuff, they just pop, which is great.
Yeah. Well, anyway, the end of the story is that Devo, they look like old Devo, like Devo today.
They do. They 100% do, actually.
Just need the
now you
hats.
say that, you've ruined it now.
Oh,
Now
no.
you've said that.
Sorry.
That's all I'll see now. So when they see the Horta, they must whip it.
Right.
Yeah.
Are we not smoking piles of bones that used to be men? Yeah.
That's it.
This is the only episode of the original series that begins without the Enterprise or its crew being involved at all in the beginning, even before the main credits. And I think that really adds to the monster movie feel of it.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen this one in a while, and when I tuned in for this show to watch it, I was like, where's the crew? Like, what is this? Like, did I pick the right show? And I think that's great for just establishing the dread that we're supposed to feel. Because even in the late 60s, as a sci-fi fan, I think it would be easy for you to go, oh, no, it's nice. The creature's nice, and they're going to figure it out. Like, that's a plot I get. But they build this up so much, and, the terror, until you have to make that switch later and go, oh, no, we're misunderstanding what's going on.
Mm. Oh, I think the way it's shot is, and that's something I'd like to comment on, is I think the cinematography in this is exceptional. And I think that they've borrowed very heavily from the 40s and 50s sci-fi, the atomic age type of thing, because we don't see the creature. Which is obviously part to do with what the creature actually looks like and is. It has no right to be believable, but it's completely sold to you. But we see, just it lurching over the top of these kind of unwitting miners and the occasional red shirt,
right.
In this wave, like the blob or something like that, and it's really effective. And what I love about the start of this episode is that we get to see a different part of the Federation. We're not seeing Starfleet here; we are seeing a mining operation, and and they're trying to deal. And they talk about the Enterprise in almost with reverence, almost. Is the Enterprise coming? Because that's there's the big ship that'll save the day type of thing,
right?
And I like that. I really love the setup to this episode. I just think that it's this classic, as you said, monster movie. It sets the tone completely for the episode.
Yeah, and there's a whole cadre of like old brill-creamed men or like young gangly officers who are there to get picked off by the monster.
Yeah,
it's great.
Which probably lends itself nicely to the red shirt dilemma of people, loss of red shirts and stuff like that. So this episode probably contributes to that significantly.
Yeah, when he's getting ready to organize the search party, and there's just like 8 red shirts there, and it's like, oh boy, this is going to be a bad one. Yeah,
they're all going to get picked off at some stage.
Gene Roddenberry really liked the way this episode showed the monster as something we didn't understand. He actually said it was a classic example of doing that right. And he went on to say, I thought this was interesting. He said that, quote, the Horta suddenly became understandable. It wasn't just a monster, it was someone. If you can learn to feel for a Horta, you may also be learning to understand and feel for other humans of different colors, ways, and beliefs. Which, and nowadays it's so self-evident, and it's so well tread for us, the idea that these guys are white on one side of their face, black on the other. We get it. It's a metaphor for racism, but he's really it had been done before, but he's really the guy that I think put that in sci-fi on TV. Like it just became sort of Trek's stock and trade to have something like this.
I think, what I love about this episode is it's about assumptions.
Yeah, right.
You've made an assumption about, and it's very masterfully done by these opening scenes, is that we've been shown that this is a terrifying monster. Very much the same way that Frankenstein might be perceived as a monster, until you could kind of start to follow. And in Frankenstein, we follow the monster itself as we kind of make the realization that it doesn't it didn't ask to be like this and all that type of stuff. Right. Whereas with this one, we're kind of, we don't know what the motivations are. We don't know kind of any of this thing. All we know is it's killing things. And we have Kirk and we have the miners all kind of echoing that thing. And it's all based on an assumption that this thing's just evil, or it's out to get them, or the devil in the dark type of thing.
Right.
And what I love the most about this episode, I'm going to say it now just to get it out of the way, and then I can just blather about other stuff, is I love that the devil in the dark is us. It's not the Hoarder. And I think that's just when that realization of that kicks in, that we're the aliens, we're the people who are encroaching upon and killing. We're the monsters. I think it's not done in such a way that it hits you over the head. Like it never at any stage does Kirk look at the screen and go, "Oh, we're the devil in the dark," type of thing.
Just turns the camera. Wah, wah.
Exactly. It's like, how clever are we? Because we're the devil in the dark.
Right.
It's like The Walking Dead. I think there's a scene in The Walking Dead where it says that. It was in the comic book and it's in the show, I think, where it's kind of Rick or someone kind of goes, "We're the Walking Dead," and it's like, oh my god, yeah.
Roll credits.
Thanks for explaining a very clever title type of thing. But
at least Richard Matheson saved it, for the end of the book, like I Am Legend or whatever.
No, but that's 100%. But that's the thing. He did save it right to the end.
Yeah.
And it's taken you on this amazing ride. I was going to mention that actually because this does definitely feel like something he would have done. Because it's got a lot of I Am Legend. It's got a very I Am Legend feel to it.
Yeah.
As far as this kind of, we are the, we're on the wrong side of this one, and it takes smart people. And this is what I love about Star Trek, and I love about this episode, because Kirk goes in ready to fire at things. Like, he's been given a problem to solve. There are people who have lost their lives. He's a soldier. He knows what he has to go do.
Yeah.
But it's him and Spock's, of course, there being his logical side saying, well, hang on a second, this may not be what we think it is. But it's Kirk who comes to that decision. Because it's when he faces off against the Hoarder, and the Hoarder's showing intelligent movement and stuff. It's Kirk who pauses for a second and goes, oh, hang on a second. This thing hasn't attacked me yet.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not shoot to kill at this stage, even though up until this point he has been. He even overrides one of Spock's suggestions or commands.
Right.
When Spock says, take the, see if we can take it alive, do so. And Kirk's like, no, we'll shoot to kill. And then pulls Spock aside and says, what's going on with that?
Right.
I love that it's Kirk who comes to the smart revelation that, hang on a second, no, there is more to this. And what I love even more is that we've had this mob, this angry mob wanting to kill the Hoarder, who, as soon as the facts are presented to them, as soon as the facts are actually laid out in front of them, they go, oh my God, we're at fault here.
Right.
Let's move forward. Let's move forward. And I think that's the beautiful message of this episode and of Star Trek in general, is that you can be wrong. You can realize that you're wrong, and you can move on. You don't have to hang on to old prejudices. You don't have to, there's no reason to keep being wrong, and there's no reason to kind of let pride make you stick to your guns and go, well, no, we're not sharing this planet with these creatures. They've killed some of our people. It's like, yeah, there's a logical explanation, guys, and I love that for this episode. Yeah. I think it just... it says everything to me about what Star Trek is, that vision of humanity overcoming our previous kind of prejudices or stupidity, really. Because you can have people kind of sit down and explain something very sensibly to them, and then they refuse to believe it because it's not what they've always believed.
Right.
And there's nothing more frustrating than that. And I think that's what this is. This shows that these redneck, I guess is a terrible term to use, but these redneck miners,
Yeah, right.
These guys, these rough and orange wearing jumpsuit guys.
They're men of the earth, men of the pergium.
Yeah,
yes,
men of the earth, exactly. They're out there, getting because even one of them does have a crack at Kirk at one stage and says, you're a big man with your big starship, but now you're down here in the dirt. I also love how Kirk handles them all. I think it's a wonderful performance by Shatner in the even-handed. Like, Kirk doesn't let anyone rile him in this episode.
Yeah.
Like, they're all screaming at him, we've got to kill this thing, we've got to kill this thing. And Kirk's like, okay, everyone just chill out. We're going to do this the way I'm going to do it.
Right.
And he's very kind of even-handed. But I do love the point where he shows his force, and it's towards the end when I think the mob runs in. And again, it's this mob thing. It's like the whole Frankenstein monster type of situation again. They should have pitchforks. They almost do.
Yeah,
like they've got clubs. It's amazing. They all run in, and then they're aiming their phasers at it. And Kirk says the first man who fires is dead. And the way he says it, the way he delivers it, is just it's brilliant because it's so in control.
Yeah,
and it's so powerful, and it's everything about Kirk that is good and everything. He has been given a new situation. He has the updated facts. And by God, he's going to do the right thing. And I think that's just amazing. It's an amazing examination of his character.
Yeah, absolutely. It is.
I'm so sorry for just.
No, it's a little bit squeezed in. I think it's done well, like you said, but it is a little bit squeezed in because we've got to have. It's a monster movie.
Oh.
It's Frankenstein, so we've got to have a mob with pitchforks, and then at the end of the episode, they're like, "Oh, it's alive! Oh, great! Let's throw it a party!" Like it's very what you'd expect of a Federation citizen, But up to that point, it's like it's not sentient. Put it on a pike, kill it.
Yeah. Well,
but they're not scientists.
No, that's it. And this is the thing. It's reality of a 60-minute TV show.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
You're telling mini. In a movie version of this, it would be a much kind of a much slower reveal of that and all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
But in this, you've got to make that shift very quickly.
I also think they could have stretched the switch, because we get a switch where Spock wants to consider saving it. Kirk says no. Then Kirk wants to save it, and Spock is literally screaming at him to shoot it. And I think in a lesser script, maybe a 35-minute long Discovery script, you would just have Spock saying, "We've got to save it the whole time," and Kirk or whoever the commanding officer saying, "No, we got to kill it." And at the end, that commander realizing, well, we shouldn't have killed it. But instead, we get two changeovers there, and we've still got plenty of time because now Spock is going to mind meld with it, and we've got that whole thing, and just the economy in which they put so much into this little story about a monster movie basically is like kudos to Gene Coon.
Oh, it's as I say, I believe it's amazingly written. Personally, I think that it's I think there's a lot of stuff in here, such as the Vulcan mind meld, which we get to see being used quite effectively. We have McCoy doing his classic McCoy stuff, and probably my only criticism is that McCoy's not as open as he could be.
Yeah,
because we know McCoy's a smart dude, and we know that he's a compassionate guy.
You just can't believe there's a silicon life form out there.
Yeah, which is like, seriously, McCoy, you had a salt-sucking vampire ex-girlfriend.
As your girlfriend.
Try to kill you, man.
Yeah.
And I must say, I will note the hypocrisy of the situation where, Spock's like very gung-ho to kill a salt vampire, but, the Horta is kind of, no, it's the last of a kind, we've got to save her.
Sure.
Whereas, the salt vampire, it's like, yeah, kill it.
Last one, yep.
Yeah, last one, that's
Thank God
fine.
They're
It's
gone.
like the buffalo. It's like the buffalo, it's fine. Just kill it. Whereas this one, it's like, oh, hang on, it's the last. It'd be a tragedy to kill it type of thing. It's like, oh yeah, unlike the salt vampire that was trying to kill me. Thanks very much.
Right.
So that's the only. But I love kind of, again, there's so much stuff to go around for everyone in this episode too. It's a smorgasbord. You've got Scotty working on an antique pumping station thing. Yeah. So you've got him being an engineer, doing engineering
Scotty.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. You've got McCoy going, I think I can, I'm a doctor, not a bricklayer. And, I'm beginning to think I can cure rainy day type of scenes, which are fantastic. And you've got Spock uttering the lines, "It's life, Jim, but not as we know it." Not exactly that way, but that's where the kind of the quote comes from. It's like this is life, but not as we know it. And it's classic Spock. It's wonderful. And we get Kirk being a hero. Running through these tunnels and stuff like that. It's very, very well done. And that's why I say to me, it's this perfect bottle of an Enterprise, the Star Trek episode.
Yeah.
That it's got everything. If we had Uhura kind of doing something and Sulu there too, but we got the top 4. So I'm really happy with that because you get to see so much of it.
Yeah, it's also really uncharacteristic and unique, I think, for a 60s adventure show hero to do what Kirk does, which is he's trapped with the thing, and there's this little tete-a-tete between them, and then he basically just sits down and goes, all right, well, clearly I can't kill you. And then he's trying to talk to it. And I just think that's such a neat moment. And we were speaking of Farscape earlier. There's a moment in Farscape that I think directly references that. I think it's the one with the Budong where Crichton gets trapped in this cave with this huge creature, and he tries to talk to it, and eventually he's like, enough of this Captain Kirk bullshit or chit chat or whatever, and then he just vaults over it and runs away.
Yeah. Oh, look, and this is the wonder of this episode, that so many of the tropes do come from it.
Yeah.
And this is why it's, the same as the Corbomite maneuver. That's probably the second episode that I would recommend as a full encapsulation of Star Trek.
Okay.
Because it's similar themes as far as, the face of the unknown and all that type of stuff. But I think this everyone's settled a little bit more, and we've got the main cast rather than focusing on someone raising his voice on the bridge and stuff like that.
Right.
They've just settled into the roles a little bit more by this episode, and I think that's really, really good. This is one of the episodes that I do say, if you want to know what Star Trek is about, this is one of the episodes to watch. Even though we have a Horta, which is a guy in a rubber vomit suit. Look, call it what it is. It is what it is, but and there's no reason for us to have any sympathy for this character or empathy for this Horta, but we do, and that's Leonard Nimoy's performance, which is extraordinary.
Yeah,
and I've got to say, Shatner, he just brings his A game to this episode, and had so much stuff going on the outside, but there's one shot of it where it is him facing off against the Horta, and the camera angle is amazing. I think it starts below and moves up, and it's just him looking as grim as he potentially could, holding the phaser on the Horta, and it's one of my favourite shots of Captain Kirk because there's so much to it. It's really cool.
I think we get a lot of stories like this, and like the Corbomite maneuver, where it's something that we don't understand. In the original series, we get a lot of them in Next Generation as well. But I'm not sure, maybe I'm just too unfamiliar with shows that come later, but it seems like they peter out and turn more into, we are the Walking Dead, man is the monster type episodes, or ones that are more introspective. But there's a ton, like even the first episode of TNG is basically that same thing. It's, we've discovered a life that we don't understand, and that's Q's entire test for us is like, can these idiots figure out that they're not like the most important thing in the galaxy? Yeah, no, that's exactly right.
I think, it's just a reality of coming after. There's a thing where you can watch some of these shows and go, oh, that's very cliched, and you go, that's because they were setting the trope,
right?
It's not cliched. When this came out, this is actually groundbreaking and very clever. And of course, you look to that and you want to emulate the best of original Star Trek when you're kind of bringing a new Star Trek show to the screens, and the challenge is to do new stuff with it, which is again the whole conversation about Discovery of don't try and be original Star Trek, don't even try and do it, because it's very hard to kind of recapture some of that stuff without us kind of going, we've seen this a mile off. And I think Brandon Braga said it when they were filming Enterprise, and he said, you're filming 30 odd episodes a season, you're going to start repeating yourself all the time. And it's like, well, again, that's probably when you just change over the staff a little bit, but never mind. It's very hard to stay within that format and do something different without one being criticised that you're not true Star Trek or whatever that rubbish is.
That's what's so frustrating about that argument, especially as it pertains to Discovery, is it's either this isn't Star Trek, and then the other side is it totally is, and here are 14 points why it is Star Trek. And I wish people could just, maybe it's not being created this way.
Let's
either.
meet in the middle.
Yeah, right. I wish that it could just be, here's a show. It's completely different, but it's from the makers of Star Trek, and just check it out. That's kind of what DS9 was. DS9 was incredibly different.
That's where I'm 100% there, and I guess it's very, as I said before, it's very tiring. I find those conversations of the the people who are really anti-Discovery, and the people who are so pro-Discovery that they can't hear anything bad about the show, and it's like, but you can't. It's got to meet in the middle, guys. It's not a perfect show. It's getting there. It's trying very hard now. Right. But even some of the stuff that's doing now, I'm kind of like, I wish they were finding their own voice. But that's not me telling anyone who likes it that they're stupid or they don't understand Star Trek. I'm not gatekeeping this. I'm just saying, I just want a really good story.
Yeah.
I don't care. I don't care that something. I don't like the over design of the costumes or whatever. It's not going to stop me from watching it, and it's certainly not going to make me go, this is not Star Trek because the costumes are weird.
And think how many shows that you've seen before and you're trying to turn a friend onto, and you say, just let the first season is, but when we get to the second season, it really takes off. Like, I know that hindsight is always 20/20, but we give so much latitude to properties, that we're trying to get ourselves or get our friends into. So if you think about it with perspective, Discovery's finding its feet, of course. I mean, it can only go up from here.
It's not being made at the same time as original Star Trek was.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. That's the thing. And it's not being made the same time that Next Generation was made. It is always a product of the river that it's now standing in. You can never stand in the same river twice. And This is where we're at now, because it's new. It's we have different political systems happening around the world. We have different discoveries, not to use the term, but science discoveries have changed our world completely. Mm-hmm. We have the internet now. We have we've been to we're sending probes to Mars. It's all these different things are changing, and you can't recreate that. It has to be a product of its time, and that's what this is. And another great example of that is Batman. Sure. 60s Batman is perfect for the 60s.
Yeah.
Like, Michael Keaton's Batman would not have worked in the 60s. I mean, it might have, but at the time, that's what they were going for. And then 60s Batman doesn't work today. The Batman's always reflected the time period that he's being presented in.
Right.
And you can tell that as you kind of go through the comics and look at the different movies and stuff like that. And so it only makes sense to do that now. No, I don't want the sets that they had. You can see this in this episode. There are the tunnels are sheets on on some sort of frame. You can see that they're very flimsy. No one touches the window, the walls of these tunnels.
Right.
So I don't want that. That's not what I'm asking for. But what I would like to see. And my only criticism of current Star Trek is that I think you can update without throwing everything out the window. So I think that the designs, and I think we're seeing that today with the new kind of uniforms and stuff, they're updating them and stuff like that. I think that these designs are all amazing. They just need to be expanded for today's kind of marketplace.
Yeah.
And again, watching this episode, you're looking at the Hoarder. I watched the remastered versions, which have got the CGI effects and stuff in them. I don't actually. I'm not a purist. I don't need to watch the original effects because it doesn't affect the story to me. And
sure.
And I think it's a very accessible way of watching it. So yeah, I mean the matte paintings alone in this are just amazing.
Oh yeah,
and
definitely.
they're clearly paintings.
Yeah,
but. They work so well, and I just kind of, and if you're going to dismiss this episode because the Hoarder looks silly, or the matte paintings are fake, or they run down the same cave structure, 20 times, you're just missing the point of theatre.
Yeah, right, exactly. From a design perspective, aliens in Trek, just because of the peccadillos of human biology, tend to be humanoid in nature generally. But do you have a favorite non-humanoid alien design from any Trek series in particular?
Oh, that's a good question. I really love the ridiculousness of the Magato.
It's fun to draw.
It's really fun to draw.
Yeah.
It's 100% a joy to draw that character. I've got several figurines of it, and the 60s figurines, like the old Mego ones, of the Mugatu, I just love, because it's so 60s, and like he's wearing a shirt and stuff like that, like a bright green shirt, and he's got the horn, and he looks like a Planet of the Apes kind of, but white. I just I love the kitsch feel of that. So it's not a particularly, I actually enjoy the episode a lot, but yeah, it's just that design. I really love that. I think because the problem is that so many of them are the humanoid aliens, because they have to be, and they explained that really well in Next Generation, I think. So I like the Borg too. I think the Borg are probably one of my favourites to draw, because I can draw a Borg without having to look at any reference or anything like that to make sure I'm not missing a detail, because you just stick gears and hoses, and if it's not looking like a Borg, stick more hoses on it.
Sure.
I just go nuts with the hoses. For an advanced technological race, they have an awful lot of hoses.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, it's like, I just think that, so the Hoarder it's a unique character. I mean, I love the Salt Vampire too. That looks amazing.
Yes.
The Gorn is a very hard one to do, and these are very classic looking 60s aliens that you can get away with in this series, whereas we've all seen the Gorn redone, and it wasn't exactly as good as it could be.
Yeah.
Whereas if you'd walk someone out in that exact costume, I don't know, I think I possibly would have worn it better, and would have gone, I don't want a CGI Gorn. I want the guy dressed as in that ridiculous kind of puffy lizard outfit.
Yeah.
I'll believe it. I'll accept it for whatever it is. So
I always liked Sylvia and Korob from Cat's Paw. At the end of the episode, when they lose their magic or whatever, and they're just these tiny little like pipe cleaner type creatures.
Yes, pipe cleaner creatures.
It doesn't quite. I think with modern camera technology, they could make the perspective, and the scale work. It doesn't quite work, but they're just so weird. It would be so easy to just have them show Sylvia like, oh, she's an old woman, with horns or something like that. But they just went, let's do this. Probably because they were out of money. But they said, let's do this. And somebody just let their imagination go crazy. And you just think about...
It's ambitious.
Yeah. Well, like, where's this? Is the planet tiny that these little tiny pipe cleaner creatures live on? Like, I just had so many questions about that.
Another favorite of mine is Sargon. Who's is basically a giant globe.
Yeah.
That has been reused all through original Star Trek. I think he was Nomad at one stage, and
it was the Romulan cloaking device, and
that's right. It was too.
Yeah.
Yes. So I like that too. It's a clever way of kind of just, it's a solution that they've got, and I think that's kind of. I think when you've got too much money when you're making something, that can often be a hindrance as well. I know it sounds crazy to say that, but I think when creativity comes into play and you have to be creative with your camera angles and your money and what you're building and stuff like that, I think that can actually work in advantage of a creative activity.
Yeah.
And I think Avatar is probably a good example of that, where Jim Cameron has he had no barrier. He just spent as much money as he wanted to make Pandora and all that type of stuff, and it looks great, don't get me wrong, but is it as innovative as the Terminator or Terminator 2? It doesn't have that same kind of, Terminator, they're trying to make this liquid metal and they're trying to work out how to do it, and they've got mercury which doesn't react in any way that they want it to, so they've got to be creative and run glue along strips of where they want the mercury to roll and stuff like that. It's problem solving 101. It's, instead of just doing it all in CGI, you've got to try and work out, okay, how are we going to make this look real? And I think Star Trek really shines when it's doing that, and I think that's something we've seen in all the shows. Because they do run out of money very, very quickly into a season, and they go, all right, okay, from now on, it's a disembodied voice, the alien, and
the alien ship is invisible. Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's all
you don't have to build a model.
Yeah, exactly. Look, the Klingons have been selling their ships to the Romulans, and now the Romulans have Klingon ships too.
We didn't even talk about We didn't even talk about the scene at the beginning, or just the scenes with the miners in general. There's a guy named Schmitter who, I guess there's like a New York in space. Like, generally there's a kind of received pronunciation type situation that you get, with actors on TV in the 60s and in movies. But this guy just comes, like, he's just like they got him straight off the street. It's just like, boy, I sure don't want to get eaten by one of these, by some kind of monster.
But it's so folksy. I love it.
Yeah, I'm sure that was on purpose.
I hope so. I hope it wasn't an accident, because it is very clever on itself too. It's like, if only they had a kid there too. Golly, mister.
Yeah, there's the one.
Golly,
there's the one guy that.
Golly, mister, are you going to save Ruffles? No, son. Ruffles has been eaten by the hoarder.
Right.
Yeah, it is kind of, and he may as well just look at the camera and say, "I am going to die."
Yeah, I know.
If only he had a wife and child back on Earth that he has to send, or an elderly mother that he has to send his paycheck to.
Right.
That would have really sealed the deal for him. But yeah, you're right. It is a great accent.
Well, since I'm only 2 days from retirement, I guess I'll wait here. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly. Golly, sir, it just feels so gosh darn dangerous down here. Yeah.
And then there's that guy that gets killed, I think last or second to last, who looks, he kind of looks like Kenneth from 30 Rock, who, he basically just, actually, that actor, the red shirt actor, who looks like Kenneth from 30 Rock, I think his character's name is Kelly. And as far as I know, that is his only credit. His name is John Cavett. Nobody knows anything about him. He plays a guy that goes, and then dies in The Devil in the Dark, and nobody ever saw that guy again. So
I'm glad that this was done in a period where we weren't quite as snarky on TV too, because I honestly, when Spock rocks on in and he looks at the phaser and the burn mark on the ground, he goes, he didn't even have a chance to fire his phaser. And I'm like, didn't he? And it's kind of like, didn't he? Really?
Right.
Because he should have had it out and he should have been ready to go. I mean, a bit of sarcasm would have been appropriate in the scene, I think, because he did kind of let the team down, because it had plenty of time to rear up and jump on him. So, yeah, but that's just, it's getting to a stage where it's pure and innocent time when he was stunned by this silicon creature's beauty or something,
right? Or just horrified. Yeah, right.
Yes, and just didn't, because I've got a replica phaser here. They're pretty easy to pull the trigger.
They needed
it's a hair
scene
trigger.
with him fumbling an insert with him like trying to hold
that
onto
would
it.
have been awesome. That would have been awesome.
They lost that.
Would have been fantastic.
They lost that because Shatner had to go. They couldn't shoot that.
Yeah, that would have been amazing. I would have loved that. So.
I had a question for you. How does mind melding work exactly? Because we get a lot of mileage out of the whole, I'm going to put my hands on your face in these acupuncture points or whatever. But we do have a no-contact mind meld here. And for all the haters who say that it's impossible to have 1,000 light-year mind meld or whatever, I'll just say that we do establish that, whatever telepathy is in this universe, it can be done, without touch by Vulcans.
Well, we actually see it twice, because we also see it not in this. We obviously see it in this episode where he gets the vague impression, but he also does it in A Taste of Armageddon, I think, where Spock and Kirk are locked up, and he mind melds through the wall.
Yes.
To get the poor guard to open the door. So it's definitely it's as far as if we're gonna get into canon, and canon's a filthy word as far as I'm concerned. Because I feel that headcanon is the only canon that matters, because no one can change it on you.
Right.
But if we're going to talk canon, the reality is that, yes, indeed, in at least 2 episodes that I can think of, including this one, Spock can mind meld without touching. Whereas I've read in like Star Trek and books somewhere that Vulcans are touch telepaths. And it's like, but they're not. Like, we've seen it twice here.
Right.
So, yes, I don't. I've just accepted it. I don't really think it matters.
Yeah, me either. I like the emphasis of the my mind to your mind thing. Like, you are leaving a piece.
Well, that's a deep. See, because as he does say in this episode, where he's only got a sense of pain,
right?
And he hasn't conveyed anything at that stage.
Yeah.
It was not until he actually touches the Horta that the exchange happens properly.
Right. Yeah. And then, of course,
So
like
I think
the
that's
Horta,
a good definition.
the Horta gains at least the ability to write, however it writes, with its acid, I guess, in broken English. And so there is an exchange of understanding and information there. If only humans could actually mind meld, there would be no conflicts or wars.
Well, this is it. Although in saying that, I don't know if I want anyone digging around too deep.
Stay out of Lee's mind.
It's not pretty in there. Well, and I guess that's something we haven't just discussed either, I guess, is the Horta's no-kill eye, which is iconic and amazing. And it has, again, it's one of these things that has no right to actually work.
Yes.
Like on paper, if you read that, you're like, that's not gonna fly at all. That's gonna look ridiculous. But here, it's sold so well that it just does work. And there is the conversation of what does it mean? Does it mean that it's not going to kill, or that we shouldn't kill it, and stuff like that? And I like that. I like it. I just think that it works. And I think Spock's whole mind meld thing, I really feel for Leonard Nimoy because the performance is amazing. But it's also, it would be very embarrassing on set.
Yeah, you have to put yourself out there for sure.
Oh, and playing a emotional character continuously, and then having to do that, it's quite a feat. And to go on that story that you were telling before about how Shatner found it quite funny when Nimoy was reciting his lines, it's actually one of the sore points apparently. Between them,
really,
according to Shatner's, I think it's his Leonard book, or it's one. I don't think it was in Movie Memories. I think it was in one of his. Star Trek Memories. Okay. It's one of his books. He talks about that was actually, Leonard Nimoy was actually quite offended that he made a joke during that, because he thought he was doing, the right thing, and he was being set up basically by Shatner to do the line. Now, for good purposes. I mean, it wasn't Shatner just trying to be a dick to Leonard Nimoy. He was trying to break the tension and blah blah blah. But Leonard Nimoy apparently didn't quite see it that way, because he was the butt of the joke.
Yeah. Well, he's a talented performer, but I have heard other anecdotes about he's there. You could rub him the wrong way sometimes.
Yeah.
He would take something where you'd be like, "Oh, it's a joke," and he wasn't a joke to him sometimes.
Yeah. So it's interesting that kind of whole thing was going. Whenever Nimoy's kind of doing those lines, I'm always reminded of that story, and I was just like, I feel it's a shame, because it is. He really is wearing his heart on his sleeve in that performance, even though out of context it looks ridiculous. Like, out of context it's silly as. But in context he sells it. And I just really like that. And again, it's just it's a testament again to the actors themselves, who are just really great performers.
I think he did say, Nimoy, that the closing banter between Spock and Kirk in the show was one of his favorite scenes to perform. This is the whole, I see no reason to stand here and be insulted.
Oh,
he felt
classic,
that really encapsulated, the relationship between Spock and Kirk. Which, again, it's funny because the character of Kirk is literally making fun of Spock. That's fine. But when Shatner tries to rib Nimoy, no, we can't have that. Yeah,
exactly. Well, 100%. I love their kind of relationship in that. I remember reading an article somewhere where he talked about the Galileo 7, how Kirk doesn't appear in that episode except on the bridge and everything like that. But for the most part in the episode, Spock is without Kirk. Mm-hmm. And he said that he watched the episode and kind of came back to it and went, it doesn't work. Spock and Kirk they're a package deal, and the episodes work better when they're working together. And he didn't actually like the Galileo 7 for that reason, is that they're two parts of the same character. And I thought that was really interesting, because you do kind of feel that absence of when they are interacting with each other, it always shines. And I think Star Trek 4 is the best example of that.
Yeah.
It's just magic seeing Spock and Kirk kind of wandering around San Francisco looking for whales. But they work so well together. And I think Nimoy had that. Egos aside, I think he had a very clear understanding of that. That it was they were better as a sum of all their parts rather than individually on their own. And I would agree both ways. Whilst Shatner is he can be quite mesmerizing on screen and completely eats up the screen. It always worked better when they had, particularly the trio there. I think that always worked better. So
Yeah, not the empath though.
well, no.
I think
I was going to mention Spectre of the Gun with people who,
Sure.
are all upset. I was going to mention it before when we were talking about, people not believe. It's like Spectre of the Gun is not a bad episode, yet it's literally just facades of a Western set.
Yeah, right.
With a different coloured screen type of thing. It's actually, you can't get too caught up in this at all.
Right.
When that's a perfectly acceptable episode.
I think that Shatner has said in the past that this was his favorite episode, particularly because of what was happening behind the scenes. But he has said other episodes before, but he likes it. Anthony Rapp has also said that this and I think Amok Time are like two of his favorite, if not favorite episodes, and specifically because of Nimoy's performance and also going through the mind meld with the Horda.
It's nice to hear that.
Yes.
Because it's always nice to hear someone who's involved with Star Trek currently, I guess, living their dream out to some degree.
Oh, yeah.
Will Wheaton, when he was on Next Generation, being a massive Star Trek fan, that's what a joy. To hear those stories that he was excited to put on the spacesuit and stuff because he was a Star Trek fan. And whilst it's perfectly fine for someone like Patrick Stewart or someone like that who wasn't a massive fan of Star Trek to begin with,
right?
You don't need to be to do your job. And people always get a little bit disappointed, I think, when they discover that the actor in question doesn't know anything about the show or whatever, but they're doing their job, and they're doing their job well.
Yeah.
But it's always a joy when you discover that someone is really into it, and it is, it's a joy for them to go to work because they get to play in the universe that they grew up with, and I think that's really neat. So that's really nice to hear about Anthony digging these episodes and knowing what these episodes are at least.
So you've met Shatner. Have you met any other stars from Trek?
Gates McFadden, I met her recently.
Right.
She was out here in Australia and she was delightful and a lot taller than I thought she would be.
Yeah, she's very tall.
Well, yeah, because see, I dressed up as I'm not a cosplayer at any means, but I'm at an age now where I can grow the Riker beard and have a bit of grey in it.
Sure.
And I've got generally, if I'm going to cosplay any of the actors, it'll be Riker.
Yeah.
And so I got a Nemesis outfit and went dressed as that. And then I stood next to her to get a photo and realised how much shorter I am than Jonathan Frakes. And made that joke to her, which she said, no, it's perfectly fine. She was delightful. Dominic Keating, I met him too. He was delightful.
Neat.
Oh, real pleasant guy. Really, he's another one who's really, he knows exactly kind of the joy of. He's really great with the fans.
Yeah, he's great at conventions.
He loves the fact that he's part of Star Trek, and I think that's awesome. And when he was chatting with me, he was just, really giving, and I like that. I think he can become jaded really quickly and not kind of want to talk to anyone and stuff. But he was really, really good too. So, and I think that's it. I think I've met a couple of Stargate people, and I think Jason Momoa is my other big one, literally big one. I have a photo next to him where I literally don't come to his shoulder.
Oh, wow.
This is pre-Aquaman, so this was Stargate-ish.
Sure. This was back at that time when he was before?
Yeah, it was just after Game of Thrones.
Okay.
So he was.
He had a beard.
He was. Yeah, he did actually.
Right.
Yes. So he was famous for Stargate, obviously in Stargate circles.
Right.
But he'd finished his run on Game of Thrones, and so he'd reached a wider audience. And they were just about to announce that he was Aquaman. And when I was talking to him, I said congratulations on becoming Aquaman, and he grinned and just winked because he wasn't allowed to say anything.
Okay. Interesting.
So he's a very cheeky dude, and he's very clever, and I don't know if I can repeat what he said to me, because what I do is I like to take one of my drawings and get it signed by them. Uh-huh. And so I got a picture of him as Ronan to sign, and he picked it up and he was like, he just stood up and just yelled out, "This is effing awesome," type of thing, as only he could in his voice. And it was just, he was an absolute pleasure to encounter. So, yeah.
Well, go figure. The funnest, nicest, most personable guy has the biggest DC movie. Who would have thought?
Yeah, well, this is it. He revels in that, and I think that comes across. That's the thing.
Yeah.
The other really good one was Christopher Guest or Judge Teal'c from Stargate. He was an absolute delight too. He was actually the first celebrity I met, like that in a convention kind of situation. He was just very, very cool.
I would like to meet Christopher Guest, though.
Yes.
The six-fingered man, of course.
Yes, that's it.
Did you have any last thoughts about The Devil in the Dark that you wanted to share?
I'm so happy you got the title out that time.
Oh, please.
I love. I don't know. It's. I can't gush enough about this episode, which is ridiculous. It's just because it's not an episode that originally, as a child, stood out to me.
Yeah.
It's an episode that I've come to love as an adult, and I just, there's so much depth to it, and I would really urge anyone who's not seen original Star Trek, if you've only ever seen Discovery, or you've just, or even the later, Deep Space Nines and stuff like that, and you are looking for an original Star Trek episode, a lot of people will say to you Trouble with Tribbles or City on the Edge Forever, whereas I think this is actually the best episode to check out everything that's original Star Trek, and the joy that is original Star Trek.
Yeah, in Greenwich or England or wherever it is, they have a hunk of metal that is exactly 1 pound, and it's how they determine, what the weight of a pound is, and that's what this is for Star Trek. It's like this is the Star Trek episode that you can compare all the episodes to. And
it doesn't mean that another episode
isn't
better or is worse. I just think that if you want to encapsulate everything, if you can only have one episode to showcase Star Trek, I think this is the episode that does that. And there are plenty of episodes in all the series that are just exceptional. And I think Inner Light's a good example. It's a Picard episode, but it's a genius episode. It's it's possibly my favorite Next Generation episode, but it's not the best example of Next Generation. It's an extraordinary story. It's an extraordinary performance, but it doesn't encapsulate what Next Generation is.
Yeah, right.
It's just a really good story. So this is, Devil in the Dark for me is original Star Trek in complete package. Well, very neatly tied up.
I'd have to agree. Let's talk My Space Dad Can Beat Up Your Space Dad. Who's your favorite captain and why?
It is Captain Kirk.
Sure.
It's Captain Kirk because he was my space dad, I guess.
Sure.
Which sounds so cliched. But I grew up with I grew up in probably not the greatest circumstances, and I think as a whole generation of people who grew up possibly in similar circumstances to me, who turned to television for our role models,
right.
Who were guided by stuff like Star Trek to kind of shape who you are as a man, or as a woman, obviously.
Sure.
And I just kind of, this original Star Trek was there in my formative years, and the combination between Kirk, Spock, and McCoy really kind of resonated with me, and it is that kind of what would Kirk do and stuff like that, and I can see how people would do the same thing with Picard. They see the same thing with Janeway, Sisko. All the captains bring their own kind of era to their positions, but Captain Kirk was that character for me, and it's shown so many times, particularly in this episode. I think it's I've talked ad nauseum about that, but Star Trek 4 is another great example of Captain Kirk, or Admiral Kirk at that stage, of the Earth's in danger. I'm not even questioning it. We're going to go do the right thing.
Yeah.
And it's not even like it never crosses his mind to go, oh, we might sit this one out and see what happens.
Right. Yeah.
It's the wonder that is Captain Kirk, where it's like Spock goes, well, I've got a crazy idea. It probably won't work, but we could give that a try. It's pretty much all we've got. And he's like, right, we'll do that then.
Right.
And it's this wonderful, connection between him and Spock, and also McCoy. They're going, well, this is crazy. We shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah.
And so I think them three as characters do really epitomize kind of the good qualities in humanity. And so I grew up, as I said, with my space dad, who Captain Kirk could beat up pretty much any of the other captains. Controversy.
Boy, I think it'd be a pretty fair fight with maybe the edge to him.
Sisko would give him. Cisco would give a fair run.
Cisco's
for
a big
his money,
guy.
Cisco's a big guy, and I reckon he can throw down.
Yeah.
Whereas Picard, I think we've seen that Picard's more of a diplomat, and he had to go get Kirk to beat up Soren. So and I think he only just beat out Janeway slightly.
Right.
She's scrappy.
Depends on how much coffee she'd had. Yeah.
Well, this is true, but she's scrappy, so I'd give her a chance there. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, now that we've reached the end of the show, you'll receive a commission and the rank of ensign. What department on the ship do you work in?
Sciences, botany, actually.
Botany, very specific.
Yeah.
Why botany?
You know what? I have an interest in, and it was something I only discovered through a meme a couple of years ago, where people were asking about Star Trek, a Star Trek meme, where those 20 questions and stuff like that.
Okay.
And it was exactly that question of kind of what would you be? And of course, the instant answer is always, I'd be captain. And it's like, well, the reality is, very small percentage. And I was thinking about it, what interests me, and something that I probably should have pursued in my actual life was botany. I've always had interest in plants. And so the idea of doing kind of xenobotany or space botany would be really, really interesting. Plus, I really like plants shaped like hands.
Okay.
I think it's a throwback to the Naked Now, or the Naked Time. Sorry, Janice's hand plant.
Right.
I'm a very pro hand plant.
Yeah.
So back then, I think Sulu was. He might have still been a botanist, or
yeah, that was
it might have just been his hobby.
Astrophysics. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
before Helmsman.
it might have just been his hobby. I just think it's something I would have liked to have pursued in my real life. So I think in my fake life as an ensign aboard whichever ship, I'd like to be looking at weird alien plants.
And they never find enough plant-based life forms, or sentient life forms in Trek. Of course, in Farscape, you've got Pauzo Tuzan.
Yeah.
And I think there's other shows or universes where you have that, but you don't see that in Trek a lot. So
I don't think they dig deep into it. Like, you had the spores from This Side is Paradise, and there was obviously a shared hive mind. Mm-hmm. And I think in a different show it might have been explored more.
Yeah.
We have I think there was an episode of Enterprise where a giant kind of mushroom spore plant thing took over and it kept kind of sucking crew members into it.
Oh.
Which I think was because the only reason why I remember the episode is they had the making of, because B'Elanna Torres directed it.
Okay.
And they were talking about the making of it and how they had to shoot it, and they were hanging in these harnesses. But it was a plant that it was like a spore kind of mushroomy fungus type of thing.
Right.
Which I think obviously going on to Discovery later on is interesting. So yeah, I think it's not something that they've particularly explored as much as they could have done.
No Groots.
No Groots or the Thing from the original version of the Thing was a plant.
Right.
It was like a cabbage type of thing,
yeah.
which attacked them until it became the horrible thing that John Carpenter made it into.
Right. Well, Ensign Sargent, that's going to be confusing. Ensign Sargent,
that is confusing.
Thanks for joining me to talk about Star Trek and the Star Trek universe. If people want to continue the conversation, and they can, at EISTpod on Twitter and the Enterprising Individuals Facebook page, where can people find you online?
Very easy. On Twitter, you can find me at Lee Sargent, LEESARGENT. That's my name. I put it out there.
Sure.
You could also probably leedrawstuff.com is probably the easiest hub to find me at. You can generally find me all over the place, so it's hard to get rid of me, as you will attest to.
And can people
after the 16 hours.
And can people buy your work at Lee Draw Stuff?
Yeah, Lee Draw Stuff is the easiest place to kind of kick off there. So, with definitely currently doing commission pieces. I've got a long list that I'm loving right now. Sure. Because I'm getting so many different kind of... I'm working on a Harry Potter piece right now. It's just all these different wonderful genres that are that if you do a year's worth of Star Trek, you forget exists. So it's exciting to kind of be doing all sorts of... But it's exciting doing the Star Trek stuff. I love doing the I love doing the like Worf and Spock. They're my two favorite characters to draw. Okay. So I'll draw them any day. But the other thing I will mention is Star Trek 365.com. That's the Star Trek 365 project. If you have an inkling to draw anything or to take a photo of any kind of, if you do a paper mache version of a Gorn head or anything, crocheted your own Starfleet uniform, I don't mind. Please, there's a form on there. Jump on there and submit it so I can share it with the rest of the Trek community.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we're signing off until the next mission. Hailing frequencies closed.